For 14 years, Elowen Hartwell believed her grandfather was a coward. The whole town said so. The whispers followed her through the grocery store. The stares lingered at church. That's the granddaughter of the man who ran. 17 miners died in the Ironmoor collapse of 1989, and Walter Hartwell signed the paper that killed them. Then, one spring morning, when Elowen was 14, he vanished. No note, no goodbye, nothing. She grew up. She got married. She spent 7 years pouring coffee for a husband, who used her inheritance to buy a house for another woman. And then, on the night she lost everything, she found something at the bottom of her mother's old box. A brass key, a folded note in her grandfather's handwriting. If life ever breaks your heart, come back to the mill. 3 days later, Elowen drove into the Blue Ridge Mountains. The old watermill was still there, standing beside the creek like a memory the world had forgotten. Its giant wooden wheel hadn't turned in 35 years, but someone had been keeping the kitchen clean. Someone had been leaving fresh wildflowers on the table, and beneath the rotting floorboards of the west storage room, hidden under decades of dust and silence, was a room no one was ever supposed to find. A room full of journals, photographs, names, and one truth, so heavy her grandfather had carried it alone for 35 years. Because the man everyone called a coward had been protecting her all along. The rain in Asheville always came slow, not the kind that punished, the kind that lingered, the kind that seemed to remember something. Elowen Hartwell stood at the window of the small furniture shop on Lexington Avenue, watching the drops slide down the glass. 28 years old, 7 years married, and for 7 years she had been the woman behind the man. She wasn't on the sign outside. Ashford Fine Woodwork, it said, in the hand-painted letters Corwin had chosen. Not Hartwell, never Hartwell. He had asked her once, softly, the week before the wedding. Do you mind, love? It's just marketing. My name has a ring to it. She hadn't minded. Back then, she hadn't minded anything. She had been 20 when they met. A girl with sad eyes, and a small inheritance, and a habit of trusting the men who smiled first. Her cousin's wedding, a barn outside Boone. Corwin had walked in wearing a linen shirt the color of mourning. He had asked her to dance. He had listened when she talked about her parents. He had cried a little right there on the dance floor when she told him they died when she was 12. Later, she would learn a man who cries too easily on the first meeting is not always a man with a soft heart. Sometimes he is a man who has practiced. But at 20 she didn't know that yet. She married him at 21. Small ceremony. Whitechapel. Her cousin gave her away, because there was no one else left. She wore her mother's earrings. She wore her grandfather's silence like a shawl, because her grandfather Walter had been gone 6 years by then. 6 years since the spring morning he vanished from the mill. 6 years since the whole town of Silver Fork stopped speaking his name in mixed company. 6 years since Elowen learned that some people leave and some people are left, and there is no fair way to sort out which is worse. For 7 years she poured his coffee. For 7 years she balanced his books. For 7 years she answered his phone in her softest voice. Ashford Fine Woodwork. This is Elowen. How may I help you? She kept his ledger. She paid his taxes. She wrote the descriptions on his website. She stayed late to sweep the sawdust from the workshop floor while he went to meet clients in the evenings. Clients, he always said. She never asked. She never asked because asking felt like accusing, and accusing felt like the beginning of the end, and Elowen Hartwell had already lost too many endings in her short life. She could not bear another one, so she believed him. She believed him about the late nights. She believed him about the weekend deliveries. She believed him when he said her inheritance, the $94,000 her parents had left in a small trust, was safer in the business account. It's growing, sweetheart. Just leave it there. Let it work. She believed him, because believing was easier than seeing. Until the Tuesday in October. It started with a rag. She had gone home for lunch, and she had forgotten her cleaning rag on the counter, and she had turned the car around, because Corwin was refinishing a walnut sideboard that afternoon and he needed it. That was all. A rag. A small, foolish errand. The kind of nothing that changes a life. The bell above the shop door didn't ring. She had oiled it herself the week before. Corwin had complained about the sound. She walked in quietly. Habit. She had always walked quietly. In her own house, in her own shop, in her own marriage. The front room was empty. The lamp was on above the register. The showroom smelled of beeswax and cedar. Everything was where it belonged. Everything except the coat on the back of the chair. A woman's coat. Camel-colored. Cashmere. Not hers. Elowen stood very still. She held the rag in one hand. She could feel the fibers of it against her palm. There was a sound from the workshop. Not a machine. Not a voice exactly. Something softer than a voice. Something that used to belong only to her. She walked toward the door. She did not run. She did not call out. She walked the way a woman walks when she already knows. The workshop door was open a crack. She could see the long walnut sideboard, half-sanded, dusty in the gray afternoon light. She could see Corwin's back. His shirt was off. His shoulders were the shoulders she had rubbed 1,000 nights. She could see the woman leaning against the sideboard, blonde, younger, her mouth open in something that was not quite a smile. Marisol Vance. Elowen knew her. She had brought a checkbook to the shop 3 weeks ago. She had wanted a rocking chair for her grandmother. There was no grandmother. Elowen didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She simply set the rag down on the little table by the door, the one Corwin had made for her their first anniversary, and she turned around and she walked back through the showroom and she walked out to her car, and she sat in the driver's seat with the rain sliding down the windshield. For a long time she did not start the engine. She thought about her mother. She thought about the sound her mother used to make when she laughed. A small hiccup at the end of it. Elowen had inherited the hiccup. Corwin had told her, once, that he loved the sound. That was on their honeymoon, in a cabin outside Boone. He had said, "Don't ever stop laughing like that, sweetheart. Promise me." She had promised. Sitting in the car, with the rain on the glass, Elowen realized she had not laughed like that in 3 years. She drove home. The house was quiet. It was always quiet. She and Corwin had never had children. He had said, "Let's wait until the business is stable." Then he had said, "Let's wait until we move to a bigger place." Then he had said, "You'd be a wonderful mother, love, but the timing." Then he had stopped giving reasons and she had stopped asking. She walked into the study. She sat down at the desk. She opened the laptop. She was not sure what she was looking for. She only knew that a woman who has seen what she has just seen does not sit still. A woman who has seen what she has just seen begins, at last, to look. She opened the business account first. She was the bookkeeper. She knew every password. Corwin had never bothered to hide them from her, because he had never believed she would use them against him. She scrolled. She scrolled slowly at first, then faster. Deposits, withdrawals, vendor payments, standard. Then she saw the transfer, $52,000. 2 years ago. To an account she didn't recognize. The memo line said equipment upgrade. She had signed off on an equipment upgrade that quarter. She remembered. Corwin had shown her the new lathe. The lathe had cost $8,000. She kept scrolling. Another transfer. $18,000. Real estate consultation. Another. $9,000. Design services. Another. $12,000. Elowen's hands began to shake, but her face did not move. Her face had been trained not to move. She opened a new tab. She searched the account number. She was not good at this kind of digging. She had been an art history major. She had learned about triptychs, not tax fraud. But you don't need a degree to follow a paper trail when the trail leads exactly where you're afraid it will. The account belonged to a small holding company. The holding company owned one asset, a 2-story craftsman house on Sunset Ridge Drive, purchased 18 months ago, deed listed in the name of Marisol Vance. Elowen closed the laptop. She sat in the dark. The rain had stopped. She had not turned on a light. The room was blue with dusk. $94,000. Her parents had left her $94,000. She thought of her father's hands. He had been a high school science teacher. He had saved for that money one paycheck at a time. He had told her on her 10th birthday that education was the only thing no one could steal from her. He had been wrong about that. She sat in the dark for a long time. She did not cry. Crying felt too small. When at last she stood up, she moved like a woman underwater. She went to the bedroom. She opened the closet. She pulled out the suitcase she had used on her honeymoon. There was still a luggage tag on it in Corwin's handwriting. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford. She left the tag. She would not touch his name again. She packed slowly. 2 sweaters, pair of boots, a photograph of her parents, her mother's earrings, the small brown Bible her grandmother had given her when she was 8. She did not pack her wedding ring. She left the ring on the kitchen counter, beside a glass of water. She did not leave a note. She had nothing to say to him that had not already been said, silently over 7 years. Then she went to the hall closet and she reached up to the top shelf and she took down the box. The box had been her mother's. It was cedar, and it smelled faintly of lavender still, though the sachet inside had crumbled to dust years ago. Elowen had not opened it since she was 17. She had told herself she was saving it for a rainy day. She thought, for the first time in her life, that the rainy day had come. She sat on the bedroom floor and put the box in her lap. She unlatched the small brass hook. Inside were her mother's things: a pressed flower from her wedding bouquet, a ribbon from a piano recital, a letter from Elowen's father, written before they were married, on stationery so thin it whispered when she touched it. Beneath the letter a photograph. Elowen at 4 years old, sitting on her grandfather's shoulders in front of the mill. Walter's beard was still black then. He was laughing. She was laughing too. The wooden wheel behind them was frozen in mid-turn, as it had been for as long as she could remember. Beneath the photograph an envelope. The envelope was yellow with age. It was addressed simply in Walter's small careful handwriting, for Elowen. When she needs it. Her breath caught. She had never seen this before. She slid a finger under the flap. Inside were 2 things. A brass key, small and heavy, warm in her palm, as though it had been waiting, and a folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it. The handwriting was Walter's. The lines were even. He had used a fountain pen. She could see where the ink had bled through in one place, as though he had pressed too hard. 1 sentence. If life ever breaks your heart, come back to the mill. Elowen sat on the bedroom floor and read the sentence 3 times. Then 4. Then 5. The mill. She had not spoken of the mill in 14 years. She had not driven past its road since she was 17 and had promised herself on her mother's grave that she would never go back. She had made that promise in anger. She had made it because anger was easier than grief, and grief was easier than the truth. And the truth was that her grandfather had abandoned her, without a word, and the mill was where he had done it. She looked at the key. She looked at the sentence. She thought, for the first time in 14 years, about the sound of the creek behind the mill. The way the water never stopped. The way Walter used to say, "You hear that, sugar? That's the mountain breathing." Something in her chest broke open. Not loudly, quietly, like the small crack of ice on a pond in early spring, when you can hear it, but you cannot see it, and you know that underneath everything is about to change. She stood up. She put the key in her coat pocket. She carried the suitcase to the car. She left Asheville before dawn. The road to the Blue Ridge climbed slowly at first, then all at once. Elowen drove with the window cracked, letting the cold October air keep her awake. The mountains rose around her, blue and gold in the early light, so beautiful it almost hurt to look at. She had forgotten how much she loved these mountains. She had made herself forget. The little town of Silver Fork lay in a valley between 3 ridges. It had 1 general store, 1 gas station, 1 white-clapboard church, and a diner that had been called Ruby's since before Elowen was born. She did not stop in town. She was not ready to be looked at. The road to the mill was a gravel spur that turned off past the church, ran along a barbed wire fence, and disappeared into a stand of hemlocks. She almost missed it. The mailbox at the head of the drive was gone. Someone had taken it down. She turned the car onto the gravel. The tires crunched. Her heart was beating in a way she had not expected. Not fear. Something older. Something that felt like memory pretending to be a heartbeat. The trees parted. There it was. The mill. For a moment, she could not move. It was smaller than she remembered. Everything from childhood is. The stone walls were dark, with rain and moss. The shingled roof sagged on the east side. The porch had a broken step. And beside it, half sunk into the ferns along the creek, was the great wooden wheel. Silent, furred with lichen. Exactly where she had left it 14 years ago. The creek was still running. The creek would never stop running. Elowen turned off the engine. She sat for a long moment with her hands on the wheel. She thought, I am 28 years old. I have lost a husband and a home and every dollar my father saved for me. I have nowhere to go. I am here. She got out of the car. The air smelled of hemlock and wet stone. Somewhere in the woods, a wood thrush called. She walked slowly up the path. The stones were slick with moss. She stepped carefully. The front door was heavy oak, blackened by weather. The keyhole was iron. She took the brass key from her pocket. Her fingers were shaking. She had not expected that. She slid the key into the lock. Turned. Easily. As though the lock had been oiled recently. Elowen frowned. She pushed the door open. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Not mold. Not dust. Cedar. Wood smoke. And something warmer. Bread. Fresh bread. Her heart began to knock against her ribs. The main room was clean. Not tidy in the way a house is tidy when it has been left. Tidy in the way a house is tidy when someone lives in it. The stone floor was swept. The old fireplace was banked, with gray ashes, still warm to the eye. A blue enamel kettle sat on the hearthstone. Beside it, a chipped mug. On the long pine table in the center of the room, there was a small brown crock. A cluster of wild asters spilled from the mouth of it. Purple, white, recent. Elowen took one slow step into the room. Someone had been here. Someone was still here. Grandpa, she said. Her voice sounded very young. There was no answer. Only the creek behind the house, murmuring against the stones. She walked further in. Every board creaked, but the boards had always creaked. Walter had loved that about the mill. He had called it the house's way of saying good morning. She looked around. The kitchen off the main room had a hand pump at the sink. It had been polished. The old rocking chair by the fireplace was still there, but it had a new cushion. Blue and white gingham. Homemade. She had never seen it before. She walked slowly through the rooms. The little bedroom in the back had fresh linens on the bed. The window was open a crack, and a curtain moved gently in the breeze. On the nightstand, a small vase held a single stem of goldenrod. On the pillow, a folded quilt. Elowen sat down on the edge of the bed. Someone had been keeping this house for 14 years. Not just keeping it, loving it. She did not know what to feel. Anger, perhaps, that someone had trespassed on her grandfather's home. Hope, perhaps, that someone had cared enough to try. She lay back on the pillow. She had not slept in 22 hours. She had not eaten in longer than that. She closed her eyes. She thought she would only rest a moment. She slept until morning. She woke to the smell of coffee. For a long, disoriented second, she thought she was in Asheville. She thought Corwin had made the pot. She thought, in the strange half-sleep, before memory returns, that everything was ordinary. Then she remembered. She sat up sharply. Someone was in the kitchen. She could hear the small clatter of a spoon against porcelain. She could smell butter. Bread again. Toast. She swung her feet to the floor. She was still fully dressed, boots and all. She stood up quietly. She looked around the little bedroom for something, anything that could be a weapon. There was a heavy iron candlestick on the dresser. She picked it up. She walked toward the kitchen door. She could see, through the crack, the back of a small woman in a gray wool cardigan. Silver hair, a long braid down her back. The woman was buttering a piece of toast on a blue plate. Elowen pushed the door open. The woman turned around. She was 70, perhaps a little older. Her face was creased, kind, and streaked at that moment with tears. "Oh," the woman said, very softly. "Oh, child. You came." Elowen stood in the doorway, with the iron candlestick in her hand. "Who are you?" she said. Her voice was flat. The woman did not answer at first. She only looked at Elowen. Her eyes moved slowly over Elowen's face, as though she were reading it, as though she had waited a very long time to read it. "You have your mother's mouth," the woman said, "and your grandfather's eyes." Elowen's hand tightened on the candlestick. "Who are you?" she said again. The woman set down the butter knife. She wiped her hands on a linen towel that hung from her waist. "My name is Rowena Callaway," she said. "I live up the ridge. I've been coming down to keep the mill for your grandfather. And for you. I've been waiting for you for 14 years, Elowen. I told your grandfather you'd come." Elowen did not move. "Why?" she said. Rowena's mouth trembled. She looked out the small kitchen window toward the creek. "Because there are things your grandfather wanted you to know," she said. "And he could not be the one to tell you." Elowen felt the candlestick grow heavy in her hand. She lowered it slowly. Rowena walked around the table. She reached out one small hand and rested it, just for a moment, on Elowen's cheek. Her palm was warm. It smelled of yeast and lavender. "Sit," she said. "Eat something. You look like you haven't eaten in a week." Elowen sat. She did not know why. She only knew that she was tired, and that this woman had made toast, and that the mill smelled of cedar and bread, and that for the first time in a very long time she was in a room where someone had been expecting her. Rowena put the plate in front of her. Toast, jam, a small slice of yellow cheese, a tin cup of coffee. Elowen ate, slowly at first, then hungrily. Rowena sat across from her. When Elowen had finished, she set down the cup. "I told you my name," Rowena said. "I'll tell you the rest in pieces if you'll let me. Some of it will be hard to hear." Elowen waited. "I knew your grandfather Walter," Rowena said. "For most of my life. I knew your grandmother. I knew your mother." Her voice softened. "I knew your mother very well." "How?" "That is one of the things I'm going to tell you. But not this morning. This morning I only want you to know that this house has not been empty. That your grandfather asked me before he went away to keep it ready, because he believed with all his heart that one day you would come back." Elowen stared at her. "He left me." "He did. He did leave, Elowen. But not for the reason you think." Something in the way she said it made Elowen's throat close. "Then why?" Rowena looked at her a long time. Her eyes were very blue. "Because he was afraid. Not of you, child. Never of you. He was afraid of what would happen to you if he stayed." The words made no sense. And yet they lodged themselves somewhere deep, beneath every angry story Elowen had ever told herself about her grandfather. Something in her began very slowly to loosen. Rowena stood. She began quietly to clear the plates. "For now the house needs airing. The west storeroom is in bad shape. Your grandfather never let anyone touch it. I think he was saving it. I think, Elowen, he was saving it for you." Elowen looked at her. "For me?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because your grandfather was a careful man. He knew that some things must be found, not given. He used to say that the truth is like a seed. It has to be dug for." Elowen stood up slowly. Something in her had shifted. She walked out of the kitchen. She walked through the main room. She walked to the door of the west storeroom. It was a low door, made of heart pine, blackened with age. There was no handle, only an iron latch. She lifted the latch. She pushed the door open. The room smelled of dust, and old wood and rain. The window in the back had a broken pane. A shaft of afternoon light fell across the floor. Boards were cracked. A beam had come loose from the ceiling. Piles of old sacking, rusted tools, splintered crates. She stood in the doorway. She thought, I don't know what I'm looking for. But she stepped inside. She began, slowly, to move things. She dragged an old crate toward the door. She swept a corner. She lifted a sheet of rusted tin that had fallen from the roof. Her muscles ached. Her hands blackened with dust. Once, she caught her palm on a splinter, and blood beaded up along the line of her lifeline. She wiped it on her jeans and kept working. She worked into the afternoon. She worked past hunger. She worked until the shaft of light through the broken window began to slant gold. And then, just as she was moving a rotten plank near the north wall, she felt it. A hollow sound. Beneath her boot. She stopped. She stepped again. Hollow. Her breath caught in her throat. She knelt down. She brushed away the dirt. She lifted a splintered board. Beneath it, another. Beneath that, iron. An iron ring set flush into a square metal plate, blackened with age. A trapdoor. Elowen sat back on her heels. For a long moment she did not move. Then, very slowly, she reached out. She hooked her fingers through the iron ring. She pulled. The door did not move. She pulled again, harder. Nothing. She stood up. Her legs shook. Against the far wall, half buried under sacking, was an old crowbar. She went to get it. Outside, the afternoon light was fading. The creek behind the mill went on, with its endless, patient song. Elowen carried the crowbar back to the north wall. She knelt again. She set the flat end under the edge of the iron plate. She pushed. The hinges groaned. 14 years. Perhaps more. Dust rose. The trapdoor lifted a fraction. Then more. Then all at once, with a low iron sigh, it opened. A rush of cold air came up out of the dark. Air that had not moved in a very long time. Air that smelled of stone, and cedar, and something faintly sweet. Paper. Ink. Time. Elowen leaned forward. Below her, cut into the earth beneath the mill, narrow stone steps disappeared into the dark. She could not see the bottom. She sat back. Her heart was beating in her throat. She thought of her grandfather's careful hand. If life ever breaks your heart, come back to the mill. She thought of Rowena's voice. Some things must be found. She stood up. She went to her car. She got the small flashlight from the glove box. She came back. At the top of the stairs, she paused. She looked back once at the storeroom, at the shaft of gold light, at the doorway to the world she had known. Then she turned on the flashlight, and she began slowly to go down. The stairs went down farther than she expected. 12 steps, 15, 20. Elowen counted them, because counting was the only way to keep her hands from shaking. The flashlight beam bounced off stone walls. The air grew colder with every step. It smelled of dry paper and cedar oil and something else, something like the smell of a church that has stood empty for a long time. At the bottom, the beam swept across a doorway. Not a rough cellar door. A door. Real wood. Sanded. Hinged. Handled. Someone had built this on purpose. Elowen pushed it open. The room on the other side did not belong to a mill. It did not belong to a mountain in Silver Fork. It belonged, she thought for one confused moment, to a scholar, or a spy, or a man who had been both. The walls were lined with cedar planks. Bookshelves rose from the stone floor to the low ceiling. There were file cabinets, a corkboard covered in maps and photographs and small red pins, a wooden desk, a leather chair, a green banker's lamp. Elowen stepped inside. The dust on the floor lifted in slow spirals around her boots. Everything was in order. Nothing was in ruin. This room had been kept. On the desk, 2 things. A leather-bound journal, and a pocket watch. Silver. Cracked glass. The hands frozen at 2:17 in the morning. Elowen recognized the watch. She had seen it 100 times as a child. Walter used to wind it every night, even though it had never worked. She had asked him once, when she was 7, why he kept a watch that couldn't tell time. He had said, "Because some moments aren't meant to move on." She sat down slowly in the leather chair. She picked up the watch. It was cold in her hand. She turned it over. There was engraving on the back. She had never seen it before. She held it toward the lamp. Some moments remind us who we failed, and who we still have time to become. Her breath caught. That was not the sentence of a coward. That was the sentence of a man who had carried something for so long it had grown into him. She set the watch down. She reached for the journal. The leather was worn smooth at the edges. A green ribbon marked the first page. She opened it. "Elowen, if you are reading this, then I failed." She stopped breathing. "I failed to protect this family. I failed to protect the men who trusted me. And worst of all, I failed you." She turned the page. "You believe I abandoned you. I know you do. I have imagined your face 1,000 times, growing up without me. The shape of your anger. I have deserved every hour of it. But the truth is not what the town told you. The truth is not what the papers wrote. The truth is buried, sugar, and I buried most of it myself. Because I was afraid." Her eyes filled. She wiped them with the back of her hand. She kept reading. "I want to tell you what happened. Not all at once. I could not bear it all at once. So I have written it in pieces. In the drawers of this desk. In the files on those shelves. In the photographs on that wall. Read what you can. Rest when you cannot. And know that every word I put down was written for you." Her hand shook. She turned the page. A photograph fell out. She caught it against her knee. 17 men, standing in front of a mine entrance. Denim, hard hats, some smiling, some just squinting into the sun. Walter was among them, younger, broad-shouldered, his beard still black. On the back, in Walter's hand, Ironmoor Number 3, April 16, 1989, the last day before everything changed. Elowen turned the photograph over again. She looked into the faces. She counted. 17. All of them. She had grown up with the story. Everyone in Silver Fork had grown up with it. The Ironmoor collapse of 1989. The tunnel that gave way at 2:17 in the morning. The 17 men who never came home. And her grandfather, the engineer, the man who had signed the safety report. She turned back to the journal. "I signed the paper. That much is true. I want you to know that, before anything else. I signed it. My name is on it. My hand. But I did not write it." She turned the page. "They came to me a week before. 2 of them. From the corporate office. They told me to sign what they had drawn up. I said the tunnel was not sound. I had inspected it. I had a folder full of tests. I showed them. They did not look at the folder. One of them said, 'Walter, your wife is not well. Your daughter is grown, but she is not out of reach. You have made a good life. It would be a shame if something happened.'" He did not say what. He did not have to. Elowen pressed her hand to her mouth. "That night I did not sleep. I sat in the kitchen with your grandmother. She could barely lift a spoon by then. The doctors were doing what they could. There was talk of a clinic in Baltimore. Money. Time. I told myself the tunnel might hold. I told myself accidents are rare. I told myself one paper. Only one paper. I signed it in the morning. My hand did not shake. That is the thing I cannot forgive." She turned the page. A week later, at 2:17 in the morning, the roof of Ironmoor Number 3 came down. I heard the sirens from the mill. I stood on the porch in my slippers and watched the ambulances go up the mountain road. Then the coroner's wagon. Then the priest. I stood on that porch until sunrise. I could not go inside. I did not deserve a warm house. Elowen let out a small sound. She flipped forward. Pages of names. Widows. Children. Handwritten notes. Funeral programs. Newspaper clippings yellowed and folded. Then a headline she had seen before. Lead engineer blamed in Ironmoor disaster. Company denies negligence. Walter had circled one sentence in the article, over and over, until the ink went through the paper. Walter Hartwell acted independently. Below it, in his hand, "They are lying. I signed the paper, but I did not write it." Elowen sat back. She turned to the next page. Another photograph. Not a mine. An office. Men in ties. A younger man in the center. Dark hair. Sharp jaw. A pin on his lapel. Walter had written under the photograph, "Harlan Voss, Vice President of Operations. Ironmoor Number 3. April 1988. Elowen stared at the man's face. She had heard the name. Everyone in Silver Fork had heard the name. Harlan Voss was not a memory. Harlan Voss was a headline. Harlan Voss was the smiling gray-haired CEO of Ironmoor Resources, the same company under a new logo. Harlan Voss cut ribbons at hospital wings. Harlan Voss gave speeches at the County Chamber of Commerce. Harlan Voss was still standing. She turned the page. An unsigned letter, typed, corporate letterhead removed with scissors. "Sign the report, or your family will not be protected." She turned again. Another. "Sign the report. Time is short. Choices are shorter." Another. "Your daughter drives Route 40 to work every Tuesday morning. We hope she is a careful driver." Elowen's hand flew to her mouth. They had watched her mother. Long before Elowen was born. They had watched. She closed the journal. She had to. Her hands were shaking too hard to hold it. She sat in the leather chair in the small stone room beneath the mill. The lamp threw a green halo across the desk. The photographs stared at her from the walls. 17 men. A young mother. A father who would one day teach high school science. She stood up. She walked to the corkboard. The map was old. State of North Carolina. Silver Fork was circled. So was Boone. So was Asheville. So was Charlotte. Red pins ran between them like blood vessels. Each pin had a small tag beside it. Names she did not know. A judge. A sheriff. A newspaperman. A geologist. At the center of the map, a photograph of a corporate logo. Ironmoor Resources. Written in Walter's hand across the bottom. Same men. New name. Still here. Elowen took a slow breath. She sat down again. She opened the journal. She kept reading. She read past supper. She read past dark. Rowena came down the stairs at some point and set a plate on the corner of the desk. Bread. Cheese. A slice of apple. Elowen did not remember eating. When she looked up hours later, the plate was empty. She read her grandfather's grief. Page after page. The funerals. The stairs in town. The way people crossed the street when he passed. The way the church women stopped bringing casseroles when grandmother was dying because they could not stand to be under the same roof as him. She read that he had tried to talk. He had gone to the district attorney twice. He had gone to a reporter in Charlotte. Someone had called him at home 3 nights later and said, "We know your daughter is expecting a child." He had not gone to another reporter. She read about her grandmother's death. 2 years after the collapse. Cancer had won. Walter had held her hand at the end. She had said, "Take care of the girls." He had promised. She read about her mother. Her mother had come home from college that same year. She had asked Walter straight out what really happened at Ironmoor. Walter had cried. He had told her some of it. That was the summer her mother had met her father, a young science teacher, who was substitute tutoring in Silver Fork. Her mother had married him a year later. They had moved to Asheville. Elowen had been born there, and her father had begun, quietly, patiently, to gather what Walter had. Elowen turned the page. Her father had been building a case. She had never known. 4 years from the safety of a high school classroom, her father had corresponded with a retired mine inspector, an OSHA lawyer in Raleigh, an old newspaperman who had left the Charlotte paper for a small independent weekly. Her father had photocopies. He had signed depositions. He had a filing cabinet in the garage that he had told her when she was little was full of boring paperwork about taxes. He had almost had enough. Elowen turned the page. The next entry was in a different hand. For a moment she did not understand. Then she recognized the handwriting. Small, slanted, careful. Her mother had written in this book. Papa, I read what you gave me. All of it. I am so sorry I did not believe you the first time. Michael and I are going to see the lawyer in Raleigh next month. If anything happens, promise me you will tell Elowen. Please, promise me she will know that we did not just die on a wet road, that we were doing something, that we were trying. Below her mother's writing, in Walter's hand, one line. I promised. Elowen closed the journal. She sat with her hands on the leather cover. She did not cry. She had gone past crying. She was somewhere quieter, somewhere colder, somewhere true. She thought about the state trooper who had come to the school when she was 12. She thought about the principal's office. She thought about the words wet road. She thought about how everyone had said it. Wet road, as though those two words were an explanation, and not a story someone had chosen for her. She stood up. She walked to the file cabinet along the west wall. She pulled open the top drawer. Every file was labeled. Ironmoor Number 3. Site Inspections 1988. Corporate Correspondence 1988 to 1989. Widows. Death certificates. And then, at the back, thick and hand-lettered. Michael and Sarah Hartwell. Motor vehicle accident. October 12, 2008. Her breath came shallow. She lifted the folder out. Inside were the police reports she had never seen. Photographs of a black Ford Taurus at the bottom of a ravine. A coroner's report. A note in Walter's hand paperclipped to the front. I called the sheriff. I called the state police. I called a lawyer. The brake line was cut. They all know. And none of them will say it. Below that, another photograph. A close-up of a severed metal line. A cut so clean it looked surgical. Elowen sat back down on the stone floor. She did not remember standing up. She did not remember sitting down. Her body was moving without her. She read the whole file. She read until her eyes burned. Somewhere in her head a voice kept saying, wet road, wet road, wet road, wet road, my foot, the voice finally said. She put the folder down. She looked at her hands. They were her mother's hands. Long fingers, larger knuckles. She thought, for the first time in her life, that they might also be strong hands. Somewhere above her, she heard the front door of the mill open. She froze. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. 2 sets. She looked up at the trapdoor. It was open. Light from the west storeroom spilled down the stone stairs. She reached over and turned off the green banker's lamp. She held her breath. The voices came muffled through the floorboards. Check the west side. Boss said he built something down here somewhere. Another voice. Deeper. Old man was crazy. There's nothing. Boss says there is. Boss says the girl found it. Elowen's blood went cold. The girl. Elowen. Them. She pressed her back against the file cabinet. Her heart was so loud she was sure they could hear it. Footsteps moved above her, from the front room toward the west storeroom. Then a third voice. Sharper. Closer. A woman's voice. You gentlemen are on private property. Elowen recognized it. Rowena. Ma'am. Just having a look around. You are having a look around at a house that is not yours. I have called the sheriff. He is 9 minutes away. I will happily hold the line with him until he pulls in the drive. There was a pause. Ma'am. 9 minutes. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the sound of boots moving toward the front door. The heavy oak door opening. Closing. A truck engine turning over. Gravel under tires. The sound moving away down the drive. Elowen sat in the dark for a long time. She heard Rowena walk toward the storeroom. She heard the boards creak overhead. She heard Rowena stop at the top of the trapdoor. Elowen, are you down there, child? Elowen let out the breath she had been holding. I'm here. They are gone. Thank you. Rowena came down the stairs. Slowly. Old knees. One hand on the rail. She stood in the doorway of the little room. She looked around. Her eyes moved over the shelves. The desk. The corkboard. The map. I have not been in this room. He would not let me. He said, you cannot help me carry this. And so I did not try. Elowen looked up at her. You knew. I knew some. You knew about the mine. Rowena nodded once. You knew about my parents. Rowena's mouth pressed into a line. She sat down slowly on the little cedar stool near the desk. I knew some. Not all. Your grandfather told me what he could bear to. He kept the worst of it here. I only ever knew there was a here. Elowen swallowed. Who are you? Really? Rowena looked at her for a long moment. Elowen, I am your mother's sister. The room seemed to tilt. I don't have an aunt. You do. You did. I am 10 years older than your mother was. Your grandmother had me before she married Walter. When she was very young, I was raised by our aunt in Beaufort. I did not come back to these mountains until I was a grown woman. But your grandmother wrote me every year. When your mother was born, she wrote me a letter as long as my arm. She said, she has your smile, Rowena. Elowen stared. My mother never mentioned a sister. She did not know. How? Your grandmother told her only when she was dying. Your mother came up to see me twice. In this valley. In this mill. Then she and your father were killed. And your grandfather made a choice. Elowen's throat closed. He was watching them, Elowen. Thus, he was watching everyone in your grandfather's circle. Your grandfather had told me things. If I stayed close to you, they would have made me a target. And you were 12 years old. Your parents had just been buried. Your grandfather could not risk it. So he sent you to your father's cousin in Charlotte. He never told her about me. He never told you about me. He believed, with all his heart, that if you didn't know about me, they wouldn't know either. He kept us apart. For 14 years. He did. To keep us alive. Rowena nodded. Once, Elowen looked down at the desk. At the leather-bound journal. At the pocket watch that would never move again. He never came to see me. Not once. Not one letter. Not one card. Not that you saw. Elowen looked up. What? Rowena stood. Slowly. She went to the file cabinet in the north corner. She pulled open a drawer Elowen had not opened yet. Inside were letters. Bundles of them. Tied with twine. Yellow with age at the bottom, whiter at the top. Dozens of bundles. Perhaps hundreds of envelopes. He would not let me send them. He said it was not safe. He said not until she comes to us. He said she has to come home first. Elowen stood. She walked to the cabinet. She reached in with a hand that felt as though it belonged to someone else. She pulled out an envelope from the top bundle. It was addressed to her in Rowena's small slanted hand to an address in Charlotte. It had a stamp. It had been sealed. It had never been mailed. She opened it. Dear Elowen, it began. Today you would be 17. I imagine you have your mother's hair. I imagine you laugh the way she used to, with a little hiccup at the end. She could not read further. She put the letter down. 700, Rowena said. So softly she was almost speaking to herself. I counted them once. 700 letters. One a week for 14 years. Elowen did not turn around. She could not. She stood facing the wall of drawers for a long time. Then she said, without looking, I need to sit down. Rowena led her to the leather chair. She lowered Elowen into it. She put her small warm hand on the back of Elowen's neck, the way a mother settles a child. She did not speak. They stayed that way for a long time. Later, when Elowen could speak again, she said, There is more. Yes. Then help me. I will. But not tonight. Tonight you need to eat. And to sleep. And to know that this house has waited for you, and I have waited for you, and there is time now. There is finally time. Elowen let the older woman guide her up the stairs. She let her be led to the kitchen. She let a plate be set in front of her. She ate what she could. That night, she slept beneath the quilt in the little bedroom at the back. Rowena took the couch. The wind rose. The creek murmured. Somewhere, far up the ridge, an owl called once, and did not call again. Elowen dreamed of her mother. She woke at dawn, dry-eyed and clear-headed. Her chest ached, but not in the way it had ached for 7 years in Asheville. This ache had a shape. She went to the window. The mist was rising off the creek. The wooden wheel stood still and silver in the early light. She thought, all right, show me the rest. That morning, a man came down the ridge. He walked slowly. He used a stick. He was in his late 60s. Weathered face. Wide shoulders that had once been wider. Overalls. A frayed flannel shirt. Rowena saw him first through the kitchen window. She said only, Silas. Elowen turned. The man came up onto the porch. He stopped there. He took his cap off. He held it in both hands. Rowena opened the door. Silas Boone. This is Walter's granddaughter. The man's face did not change at first. Then it did. His eyes filled. He did not step inside. He did not offer his hand. He only looked at Elowen for a long, long moment. Mississippi. I owe your grandpa my life. Elowen did not know what to say. Silas came in when Rowena opened the door wider. He sat at the kitchen table. He held the cap in his lap. I was one of them, the 17. I was supposed to be down there that morning. Elowen sat across from him. I was 22. My mama was sick. I asked your grandpa the night before if I could switch to the afternoon shift. He said no. He turned his cap in his hands. I begged him. I told him about Mama. I told him I needed the pay for the doctor. Elowen waited. He looked at me a long time. Then he said, Silas, stay home tomorrow. Do not come to the tunnel. If anybody asks you had a fever, do not tell your mama why. Do not tell anybody. Silas's voice broke, just once, and then held. I did what he said. I stayed home. That night the tunnel came down. I was the 17th name on the shift list. The only one who wasn't in it. For 35 years I have been the only one who came home. Elowen felt something move inside her chest. Something enormous. He knew. He knew what was going to happen. He suspected. That was more than I could bear at first. When I found out he'd signed the paper. When they blamed him. I couldn't understand. He looked up at her. His eyes were wet and steady. For a long time, miss, I thought your grandpa was a coward like everybody else did. Until the day he came to me. About a year after the collapse. He looked 10 years older. He said, Silas, I need somebody. I need somebody to watch after this place when I can't. He said, one day my granddaughter is going to come back. He said, when she does, she will need somebody who knows. Silas swallowed. I said yes. I have been walking this ridge every week for 14 years. Since he left, I have swept these floors. I have oiled that lock. I have kept the wildflowers on the table when Rowena couldn't. Elowen looked at Rowena. Rowena was crying quietly, not making a sound. He never came back. After the day he left, he knew that, if he did, they would find him again. He believed leaving was the only way to keep you safe. Mississippi. He believed that until the day he died. Elowen closed her eyes. She thought of a small brass key at the bottom of a cedar box. She thought of 700 letters. She thought of a mill kept clean for 14 years by a man who owed her grandfather his life, and a woman who was the aunt she had never been allowed to know. She thought of the 2 men in the storeroom last night. Boss said the girl found it. She opened her eyes. Silas, Rowena. They looked at her. They came here last night. Silas nodded slowly. He had already known. Somehow he had already known. They will come back. Yes. Elowen sat very still. She thought of her grandfather at the kitchen table on that April morning in 1989, signing his name to a paper he had not written. She thought of her mother's hand in this very journal. She thought of Corwin. She had not thought of Corwin all day. Corwin, who had married her at 21. Corwin, who had spent her father's money on a house for another woman. Corwin, who had wept on the dance floor the night they met. Corwin, who had known, somehow, exactly where to find her. A cold thought pressed at the edge of her mind. She pushed it away. She was not ready. She stood up. I want to see all of it. The letters, the files, everything. I want to see what my grandfather could not bear to send. They spent the day underground. All three of them. Rowena on the little stool, Silas in the leather chair, Elowen on the floor, with folders spread around her like petals. They read her mother's letters. They read the widow's letters. They read the internal memos with the corporate letterhead scissored off. They read her father's careful teacher's handwriting notes on legal pads. By afternoon Elowen had a name in her mouth like a stone. Voss. By evening she had a plan she did not know she had. She called from Rowena's landline. She had thrown her cell phone into the creek that morning. She had watched it sink. The number she called was in her grandfather's journal. It was 15 years old. She was not sure it would still work. It rang twice. A gruff voice answered. This is Edmund. Elowen closed her eyes. Mr. Reyes, my name is Elowen Hartwell. I am Walter Hartwell's granddaughter. Silence on the line. Then a slow, careful breath. Miss Hartwell, I have been waiting for a call like this one for 25 years. Elowen's hand tightened on the phone. Can you come? To the mill. Give me a day. I will be there. She hung up. She stood in Rowena's kitchen, with the phone still in her hand. She looked out the little window at the ridge falling away in the evening light. The world was purple and gold and terrifying. She thought, all right, Grandpa. All right. She thought, I am going to finish what you started. She did not yet know that in the storeroom above her, an hour before dawn, a small red spark would catch in the pile of old sacking she had swept aside. She did not yet know that the east wing of the mill would begin to burn while she slept. She did not know that Silas would carry her out, that his shoulder would never be the same, that Edmund would arrive at sunrise to find the roof glowing, and Rowena on the porch, with her arms around Elowen's shoulders, both of them soot-streaked and silent. She did not know that as the smoke drifted up into the pines, she would look across the creek and see two figures standing on the far bank, one of them tall, silver-haired, wearing a long dark coat, Harlan Voss, and beside him, closer than a stranger, with rain on his shoulders and something like sorrow on his face, her husband, Corwin. She did not know any of that yet. She only stood at Rowena's window in the last blue light of that autumn day, holding a phone, holding a name, holding a truth that was too heavy to carry alone. And, for the first time in her life, she was not carrying it alone. The fire took the east wing of the mill by 4 in the morning. Elowen did not hear it start. She had fallen asleep at the kitchen table, her head on a stack of her mother's letters, one hand still curled around a pencil. Rowena had put a shawl over her shoulders and gone to lie down on the couch. Silas had gone back up the ridge to sleep in his own bed for the first time in a week. The spark had already been waiting in the old sacking. Elowen would think about that later. The little red spark, the bit of oily rag no one had swept from the corner, the way the two men, from the night before, had brushed past that pile in the dark. She would think about it a long time. It was Silas who saw the glow first. He was awake, as he always was before dawn. He was standing on his porch with a tin cup of coffee when he looked down through the pines and saw the roof of the mill breathing orange. He dropped the cup. He ran. He was 68 years old. He had a bad knee. He ran anyway. He came through the door shouting. Elowen came up out of a dream of her mother's voice. The kitchen was already hazed with smoke. Rowena was on her feet in the sitting room, coughing into her sleeve. Front door. Now. The papers. The desk. They're in the ground room. Stone walls. They will keep. Go. He did not wait for her to argue. He half carried her out. Rowena stumbled after them, her long braid loose over one shoulder, her face gray in the strange light. They stood in the yard. The east wing was fully alight. Flames curled out of the small square window of the storeroom, where Elowen had lifted the trapdoor. Beams cracked. A shower of red sparks lifted into the black pines. Elowen turned in a slow circle. Something across the creek caught her eye. Two men, standing on the far bank, very still, watching. One was tall, silver hair, long dark coat. Even at that distance she knew him from the photograph. Harlan Voss. Beside him, closer than a stranger, rain on his shoulders. A face she had loved for 7 years. Corwin. He was not smiling. He was not running to help. He was just standing there, watching the mill burn. Their eyes met. He did not look away. Something in Elowen went very quiet. Not fear, not anger, something colder. Something that finally understood. By the time the volunteer fire truck ground up the drive, the east wing was gone. The main house had held. The stone walls of the ground room had held. The wheel by the creek stood, as it had stood for 35 years. Untouched, unmoved, silent. Silas's shoulder was burned along the collarbone, where a beam had come down as he pulled Elowen through the kitchen. He would not let anyone look at it for a long time. Rowena sat on the porch step in her nightgown, with her arms around Elowen's shoulders. Both of them soot-streaked, neither of them speaking. They were still sitting like that when a battered brown Buick came slowly up the drive. It stopped at a respectful distance from the fire truck. A tall, thin, gray-haired man climbed out. He was 72. He wore a corduroy jacket that had seen better decades. He carried a briefcase. He looked at the smoking east wing. He looked at Elowen. He walked toward them slowly. Miss Hartwell, Mr. Reyes. Edmund Reyes stopped at the foot of the porch. He set his briefcase down. He took off his glasses. He rubbed them slowly on the corner of his jacket. I told him, 25 years ago, I told your grandfather to let it go. He put his glasses back on. I'm ashamed of myself for that. I have been, for a long time. Elowen looked at him. Then help me finish it. Edmund's face did not move, but something behind his eyes did. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I will. They moved that afternoon, to the old white clapboard church at the top of the ridge. The pastor was 78 years old. He had been a young man on that spring morning in 1989. He had buried 4 of the 17. He asked no questions. He gave them the back parlor and 2 cots and a coffee pot. Edmund set up a folding table. He put the salvaged folders on it. He put his laptop next to them. Silas sat in a wooden chair, with a bandage across his shoulder, and would not lie down. Rowena boiled water for tea. Elowen stood at the window and watched the road. She was waiting for Corwin. She did not know how she knew he would come. She only knew. He came just before sunset. Alone. He parked the black truck at the bottom of the drive. He walked up to the church with his hands out of his pockets. Palms open, the way a man walks when he is trying to prove he is not carrying anything. He stopped in the churchyard. He said, Elowen, just her name. She had come out to meet him. She did not want him under a roof she trusted. The pastor stood in the doorway with a shotgun broken over one arm, not aimed at anyone, only present. Silas stood on the porch. Rowena stood behind Silas. Edmund stayed inside with the folders. Elowen, please. Say it. He blinked. Say what? Whatever you came here to say. Say it. His mouth worked. He looked at the ground. He looked at her again. I never wanted you hurt. Wrong sentence. Elowen. Say the true one. He was quiet a long time. Then he said it. He hired me. She had known. She had known standing at the creek in the fire. She had known the moment she saw him in the doorway of the workshop 3 days ago, with his shirt off and Marisol's coat on the chair. She had known, and she had not let herself know. Hearing it out loud was different. Her knees did not buckle. She had thought they would. They did not. When? 8 years ago. Before we met. Yes. On purpose. Yes. Why me? Corwin's throat worked. Because you were the only one left. He wanted somebody close to you. He wanted to know if your grandfather had left you anything. He wanted to know if you were going to come looking. He wanted a leash. She could not speak. I was 26. I was broke. My family owed him money. His people came to me. They said, marry the Hartwell girl. Keep her happy. Keep her tame. Keep her from the mountains. They gave me a shop. They gave me a life. I told myself it wasn't cruel. She'd be happier with me than alone. You told yourself. I told myself. You spent my father's money. I did. You bought her a house. I did. That was you. Not him. Corwin closed his eyes. That was me. I owe you every dollar. I know. Look at me. He opened his eyes. Did you love me at all? The silence stretched. Somewhere a jay screamed in the pines. I did. I do. That is the worst part. I know how it sounds. I know. But I did. I do. I started to. Somewhere in the second year. And I could not stop it. And I did not know what to do. So you cheated. I cheated. On purpose. Yes. Because he was tightening the leash. Because he wanted you closer. Because he was going to move on you. And I could not think of any other way to make you walk out that door with your life. Her mouth was dry. Marisol. He put her in my path. Was she yours? No. She was his. You slept with her. Yes. Because I needed you to see. Because if you saw, you would leave. And if you left, he might not follow. She looked at him a long time. That was not your call to make. I know. That was mine. I know. You took it from me. I know. They stood in the churchyard. As the sun slipped behind the ridge, the pines went black. The clouds went gold. There are 17 men. There is my father. There is my mother. There is my grandfather. There is me. There is every widow he paid off. There is every reporter he threatened. I know. And you were the man he sent to keep me small. Corwin's face crumpled. Yes. Are you going to keep being that man? His head came up. For a long moment he did not answer. Then he said, no. Prove it. Tell me how. She stepped closer. Not close enough to touch. Close enough for him to see her eyes. You have every phone call. You have every meeting. You have every dollar. I have 5 years of recordings. Then take them to the FBI. He nodded once. And Corwin. Yes. Do not come back to me. Ever. He looked at her. Something in him went still. Not broken. Emptied. No. I won't. He turned. He walked down the path. He got into the black truck. He did not look back. Elowen watched the taillights until they disappeared down the mountain. She did not cry. She had cried her tears in the 7 years she had shared a bed with him. She had none left for him now. She turned and walked back into the church. Rowena stood at the door. She had been listening. She said nothing. She only opened her arms. Elowen went into them. She stood there a long time, in the arms of the aunt she had not known she had, in the low light of the church parlor. She thought, 14 years. And this is where I have been going the whole time. Here, to these arms. Behind her, Edmund cleared his throat gently. Miss Hartwell. Yes. I would like to show you what your husband might not be able to bring us. She turned. Show me. 3 days later, Corwin walked into the field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Charlotte. He carried a shoebox. Inside the shoebox were 5 years of recordings. Cassette tapes, micro-cassettes, small silver USB sticks, handwritten logs, names and dates in his careful woodworker's script. He asked to speak to a senior agent. He did not ask for a lawyer. He told them everything. Edmund's first article ran on a Wednesday. It ran in the little independent weekly out of Charlotte. Then it ran in the Raleigh paper. Then, on Friday morning, a national newsroom picked up the wire. By Saturday, the story of Walter Hartwell was on every television in the state. By Monday, the phrase Ironmoor Number 3 was trending on the internet. Harlan Voss denied everything. He sat in a leather chair in a wood-paneled office in Charlotte and told a network anchor that Walter Hartwell had acted independently, that his own name in the journal was a smear, that the granddaughter was troubled. The word troubled did him more damage than he understood. Because in Silver Fork, in Boone, in Asheville, in every small mountain town, where a woman was watching quietly in her kitchen, that word landed in a place he did not expect. Elowen did not go on television. She was asked by everyone, by national morning shows and afternoon shows and cable panels. She said no to all of them. Instead, she borrowed a chair at the little AM station in Silver Fork. It broadcast out of a converted feed store 2 blocks from Ruby's Diner. Its regular programming was farm reports and the high school football scores. She asked for 1 hour, 6 to 7 in the evening. Weeknights. The station owner was a widow in her 70s. Her husband had been the second cousin of one of the 17. She said yes without asking the terms. The first night, Elowen sat down at the microphone, with her grandfather's journal in her lap. She said only this: "Good evening. My name is Elowen Hartwell. This is my grandfather's voice. I am going to read it to you. He was not a coward." She read for 1 hour. She read the entry from the night he signed the paper. She read his description of standing on the porch in slippers watching the ambulances go up the mountain. Then she read one name: Thomas Nash, age 31, left behind a wife and 2 boys. Then she said, "Good night." That was the whole broadcast. The next night, another name. Silas Boone came in on the 3rd night. He sat in the 2nd chair. He did not talk. He just sat there, so the state could see. The 17th man, alive. By the 2nd week, the AM signal was being rebroadcast on 3 regional stations. By the 3rd week, it was being live-streamed by a college in Asheville. By the 4th week, the New York Times wrote a piece about it. The headline said, "The woman who read her grandfather out of his grave." Elowen did not read that piece. Rowena read it in the church parlor and folded it up and put it in the drawer and did not mention it. Elowen was busy. On the 10th night she read a letter from her mother. On the 12th she read a letter from Rowena, one of the 700, that had never been mailed. Rowena sat in the room with her while she read it. Rowena did not cry. She held her own hands very tightly in her lap and did not cry. On the 15th night, Elowen read the words that Harlan Voss had said on the internal recording her husband had turned over to the FBI. She read only 2 lines. "Use the 2nd grade steel. It will save us 4,000 a beam. Nobody is going to die in that tunnel, gentlemen." She read those 2 lines. Then she said, "Good night." 3 days later, a federal grand jury indicted Harlan Voss on 22 counts. The trial took 8 months. Silas testified for 3 hours on the 2nd day. He did not weep. He looked directly at Harlan Voss as he spoke. He said Walter Hartwell's name so many times that the court reporter later said she thought she had been transcribing a hymn. Rowena testified about the letters she had been forbidden to send. Edmund testified about the 25 years of silences he had brokered, and the one he had finally broken. Elowen testified last. She wore a plain navy dress. She sat in the wooden chair and set her grandfather's pocket watch on the ledge of the witness stand. Cracked glass. Hands frozen at 2:17. The prosecutor asked her only 3 questions. "Miss Hartwell, do you recognize the pocket watch in front of you?" "I do." "Whose is it?" "My grandfather's." "Miss Hartwell, please tell the court what your grandfather told you it meant." She looked over at the jury. She looked at Harlan Voss. She said, "He told me that some moments are not meant to move on. He told me they were meant to remind us who we failed, and who we still have time to become." The courtroom was silent. The prosecutor sat down. Harlan Voss did not look at her. He was convicted on 19 of 22 counts. He was sentenced to 28 years. He was 71 years old. The families of the 17 received settlements totaling $42 million. The mine at Ironmoor Number 3 was permanently sealed. The state placed a small bronze plaque at its entrance. 17 names, in alphabetical order. Corwin was sentenced to 4 years in a low-security facility. He served 2. He wrote Elowen a letter every month. She read them. She did not write back. Once, on the 11th month, she opened her drawer and took out a blank sheet of paper. She sat with it for an hour. Then she wrote only one line. "I forgive you. I am not coming back." She sent it. He did not write again. Rowena moved into the mill. They rebuilt the east wing in the spring. Silas swung a hammer with his good arm. 2 men from the pastor's congregation came up on Saturdays. The pastor himself came up twice in his coveralls, looking like a man 40 years younger than he was. Elowen paid for the lumber out of the settlement she inherited from her parents. She had refused to touch a dollar of it while Corwin was alive to her. Now she used every dollar. The east wing was smaller than before. She wanted it that way. The storeroom above the ground room she left as ruin. She would not build anything over the trapdoor. She kept the underground room exactly as her grandfather had left it. She had a locksmith put in a new door at the top of the stairs. She kept the key on a ribbon around her neck. She did not read the journal again for a year. When she did, she read it slowly, in small pieces, the way you eat something rich. By the end of that first summer, women had begun coming up the drive. At first it was 1 or 2. Women from the towns. Women who had listened to the radio. Women who had heard on the wind that carries such things in mountain places, that there was a house at the end of a gravel road, where a woman had come back and made something out of what she had found. A woman came whose husband had thrown her out at 59. She had nowhere. A woman came whose father had left her his silence and his debts. A woman came with 3 plastic bags and a black eye and a 2-year-old on her hip. Elowen fed them at the pine table in the main room. Rowena made up the little bedroom in the back. Silas built a bunk in the loft. The pastor's wife brought quilts. They put out the word, "Rest here. Then decide." The women came in 1s and 2s. Some stayed a night. Some stayed a week. Some stayed a season. One of them, a widow from Boone whose grown children had stopped calling, stayed a year, and then bought a small house in the valley and started teaching piano. The mill was quiet. The mill was full. Elowen was 30 by the time the local paper called it a shelter. She did not use the word. She thought the word was too small. When she called it anything, the mill. On a bright afternoon in September, when the leaves were beginning to turn, and Rowena was in the kitchen kneading bread, and Silas was on the porch teaching a 9-year-old boy how to whittle, Elowen went out to the creek alone. She carried the pocket watch in her hand. She stood beside the wheel. She looked at the water rushing beneath the moss. She thought of her grandfather. She thought of the way he had said, "You hear that, sugar? That's the mountain breathing." She thought, "All right, Grandpa. All right." She reached out and put her hand on the great wooden wheel. It was cold. It was slick with lichen. It was heavier than she was. She did not push it hard. She only laid her palm against it. She said, out loud, in a voice that was not shaking, "You can rest now." The wheel did not move. She smiled a small smile. She had not expected it to. She had only wanted to say the words. She turned. She began to walk back toward the mill. She was halfway up the path when she heard the sound. A slow, long wooden groan. She stopped. She turned. The wheel had moved. An inch, perhaps 2. The water had caught it. Or something had. It did not matter which. She stood on the path with the pocket watch in her hand, and she watched. Very slowly, as though it were remembering something, the great wooden wheel took a full turn. Then another. Then it slowed. Then it stopped. Water lifted in the paddles. Fell back to the creek. A single leaf, gold, floated free. Elowen felt something warm and small and steady in her palm. She looked down. The pocket watch had ticked. Once. Then, as she watched, once more. The hands did not move. They would never move. The crystal was still cracked. But the second hand had shifted. Just a hair. Just enough for a woman standing in a mountain yard to see. She closed her fingers around the watch. She whispered, "You can go home now, Grandpa." She stood there for a long time. Then she walked back to the mill. Rowena was in the doorway with flour on her hands. She had heard the wheel from the kitchen. She was not crying. She was not smiling. She was doing something that was both. Elowen came up the steps. She put her forehead against her aunt's forehead. Neither of them spoke. Silas came up onto the porch, holding a small wooden bird half-carved in one hand. He looked at them. He looked out at the wheel that was still now, but had turned. He took off his cap. He held it against his chest. He said, "Low and rough, Walter. Just that. Just the name." Inside the mill, a kettle whistled. A child laughed. Someone dropped a book on the pine table. The world went on. The creek went on. The mountain, as her grandfather had said, went on breathing. Elowen sat down on the porch step. She set the pocket watch on the wood beside her. She looked at the ridges falling away in the afternoon light. The blue behind the blue behind the blue. She thought about her father. She thought about her mother. She thought about 17 men in a black and white photograph, standing in front of a mine entrance, squinting into a sun that was still shining somewhere. She thought about the woman she had been, the one who poured coffee, the one who signed nothing, the one who believed anything. She thought about the woman she had become, not perfect, not fearless, not finished, but her own. She looked down at the watch. Some moments remind us who we failed, and who we still have time to become. She whispered it into the mountain wind. Then she stood up. She went inside. She helped Rowena set the table. 9 women came to supper that night. Silas said grace. The bread was warm. The lamps were lit. Somewhere behind the mill, in the last blue hour, before dark, the great wooden wheel stood ready, waiting, not for what had ended, for what was still to come.